views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a very big show today. Starting out is the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, Lorelei Salas, will be back. Ms. Salas will be discussing the Family Paid Leave Act and how it affects you during the time of COVID. Next up, we have Councilman Fernando Cabrera back. He's going to be discussing bike lanes and ways to make it safe throughout the Bronx so you can get around and hopefully make sure that your family and everybody else in the neighborhood will also be staying safe. And finally, we have a very interesting guest. Judge Christopher Droney will be on discussing tips in terms of arguing appeals in the federal Second Circuit. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. All right, well, welcome to today's verdict. Our first guest today is the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, and she has been here before on our show, Lorelei Salas. Lorelei, how are you doing today?
Good morning, David. I'm really well. Thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and it's always nice having you back. You give such vital information. Today, we're going to shift gears today and talk a little bit about the paid family leave. What was it before these major changes took effect, so we can maybe set the groundwork?
So just a couple of things to point out here. New York City has had a law providing that workers have a right to sick leave for at least 6 years, right? What is different now is that both the state and the federal governments recognized after COVID-19 hit our country, our city, that there was a really great benefit to having this law in place, right? It's a tool to fight COVID-19, and so both the state and federal governments put in place their own protections for workers with these laws. So that's what's being different and with respect to the ability of workers to stay home if they're sick.
Who's covered by the law? Who can actually apply?
And so there are two different types of leaves, and it's not super easy to navigate, right? But so workers, there's two situations. If you happen to be sick with COVID-19, or you have to quarantine because someone in your family is ill, right? And you've been in contact with them. That's a separate situation that is covered by the state law, right? And basically what we're telling all New Yorkers is that if you are sick and you get a call telling you need to stay home, you need to listen to that, and you do not need to worry about possibly losing income, because again, the state law guarantees that most workers are able to get paid for that time. So it really depends on the size of the employer, right? The smallest of employers that have 4 employees or less, those employers don't have an obligation to pay workers for the leave, but they have to allow the workers to take that time off, okay? So employers with 4 or less employees and who earn less than $1 million in income, net income in a year, only have to give the time off to workers, don't have to pay it. Bigger employers with 5 or more employees do have to compensate employees for up to at least 5 days in a year. And if you employ 100 employees or more, then your obligation goes up to 7 days in a year.
What are the types of issues that it covers in terms of the complaints that an employee may have and will say, I need to stay home? What does it cover? What does it not cover?
So under the state law, again, so this is the COVID-19, the pandemic, let's call it pandemic sick leave, right? Or COVID-19 sick leave. It covers situations in which you are ordered to quarantine, right? So maybe you get a call from the test and trace team, and they tell you you may have been at risk of exposure with someone you know, so therefore you need to stay home. That person, if the employer they work for has 5 or more employees, they are going to be paid for that time when they're quarantined, right? So you don't have to be sick yourself, but it may be that you are ordered to quarantine because you were exposed to someone who has the virus, right? So those are situations for which you will be able to take time off. And also, if you have someone at home that you're caring for, maybe a child, right? Someone who's ill, you may use that time. Now, I mentioned there are 2 different sick leave types. There's the one that is the regular sick leave, which is the New York City leave and also state law. It's both a city and state law. And it basically says that for this type of leave, it's not, you can use it for COVID-19 reasons, but it was done separately, right, from that. And so you can use that leave if you need to take care of a loved one, if you need to go to the hospital for a regular annual checkup, right, or a dentist appointment. You can also use it. This has been in the law for a few years, but it was never used before. You can use it in situations where the school closes because of the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Or your employer shuts down because the governor ordered businesses to shut down, and you have any accruals available to you, you can use that time to stay home and get paid for those hours.
Well, Commissioner, let me ask you, a lot of people wants to probably know who pays for this. Like, where does it come from? Where's the money coming from? It's got to come from somewhere.
So for the regular sick leave, which is the one that tells you up to 5 days in a year, right? That is a cost to the employer. For the COVID-19 leave, which in some cases can run many days, right? It could be 2 weeks.
Could be 14. Could be 14 days for everybody.
14 days. There are even some individuals who have long-term consequences and may be debilitated by that. The state provides for a combination of the first 5 days is at the employer's expense, and the remaining days is a combination of either disability benefits, which every employer in the state of New York already has to have a policy that covers them for disability benefits, right? So that is something that if you incorporated in New York State and you're operating in New York State, you already have your workers' compensation and your disability insurance, right? And so it actually doesn't come from the pockets of the employer, but it comes from this policy that employers have purchased. So it is complicated, and I know that especially for workers, it's complicated to understand. How do I get?
Well, that's my next question to you, Commissioners. Where do you find out the information? Where could you go to maybe look at it and read it a few times to understand? A lot of times people want to see it in writing.
Yes. And we have actually put together a lot of materials for both employers, right, who really want to understand their obligations under the law. And like I said, we even had the federal law until the end of the year that was different. So very complicated to navigate. We have those materials on our website at nyc.gov/workers or /DCWP. Either way you get there. We have them in different languages because a lot of our businesses in New York City are run by immigrant business owners. So you can access them in up to 24 languages, I believe. And for workers and for businesses, right? If you call 311 and you say, have a question about paid sick leave, you will be transferred to our office. We have, intake staff, investigators and attorneys who are going to help you navigate the system and understand your obligations.
Good stuff. Well, Commissioner, we really appreciate it. You always give us such great tips. And I know this is a very busy time for everybody and certainly for you as well. Hopefully you'll come back in a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, let us know what's going on, okay?
Definitely. Stay well and healthy, David. Good luck with everything.
You too, Commissioner. All right, stay with us. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. Anytime we have a member of the bar, it makes me so happy, a little more comfortable than some of the other guests that I have. We're pleased to have Judge Christopher Droney here. Judge, first of all, how are you doing today? How are you feeling during these unsettled times?
Feeling great and unsettled both with the COVID virus and the election yesterday and today. So
You know, in Georgia, it's just fascinating that you have something in early January and every TV is on watching the results come in county by county. It's just riveting. We certainly live in interesting times, and that includes arguing appeals as a member of the bar. It's not your normal argument, I would assume. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about your experiences and what's been going on with respect to federal appeals and the arguing of same?
So I was on the federal appellate court in Manhattan for 8 years until a year ago, and I retired, and I'm a member of a law firm again. And I wrote a piece that you saw, David, last week, where I gave tips to lawyers arguing remotely because they can't go to court anymore like the rest of us. So it's really how to handle that. It's hard enough to argue an appeal when you're a lawyer, but it's even more difficult when you're not in court and you have to do it either over the phone or on Zoom. So they're tips really for those lawyers. And I think they apply in the appellate court I was in, but more generally, wherever you're doing either an audio appeal or a Zoom appeal, there are tips on how to be more successful when you do it.
Let's go through a few. Give us some of the real strong ones that there's a young attorney or any attorney who's really watching and is not comfortable in front of a camera the way we're doing right now. And, you know, as an attorney who's been in federal court, you know, it's in front of a federal judge. Sometimes you can get a little nervous. That's in person. So give us a.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that let's take, if you say it's a Zoom argument or Microsoft Teams, or there's an audio and a visual component to it. It's very, very similar to being there in person, but there are some tips. And I've seen almost every I've watched a lot of arguments, and almost every one of these is not followed in every one of these arguments. I mean, first of all, make sure you look like you're in court, dress appropriately. Make sure you have good technology. You have a camera at eye level that works, that you've done a rehearsal with, that you don't have another phone going off in the background, your kids don't come in, that you have enough bandwidth with your computer and your internet.
So Judge, would you practice that beforehand? Would you actually get out the phone or whatever it is that you're recording on, you know, the computer, and do a little run through to make sure the lighting is fine, and then go back and see how it works? Would you do that?
That's what I've done.
Okay.
And I think it really helps. I've taken every opportunity to do Zoom meetings just because I wanted to see how the lighting was, how my equipment was, how I sounded, how my background was. I mean, one of the judges told me from the Second Circuit, have like a blue or a white background, because you don't want to be distracted by like trying to figure out what books I've got on my bookshelf behind me, which goes on all the time now in the news shows when we're watching you.
All the time.
What is Judy Woodruff reading? You know, so there's a bunch of those minor things, and they seem very minor. They're violated all the time. You know, I've seen many arguments where the screen freezes or the audio freezes. It's hard enough to win your appeal on the merits.
Do the judges sometimes get frustrated? You know, technology is tough to begin with. Sometimes they're a little bit older. You know, there's a learning curve. Is there a temperament issue sometimes that comes across, or basically?
There is, and I think you've hit it on the head. I mean, it's the age issue. It's all of us are from a different generation where we didn't grow up with this technology, so it's more foreign to us. Zoom is easier because it's like being there in person, and you can have assistants figure it out for you. But if it's audio only, like I'm sure you've listened to Supreme Court arguments last term, where it was audio only, it's very different because you can't see anybody when you're arguing, and the judges can't see each other, so they can't tell, like, does Justice Kagan want to ask a question? I can't see her to do that, and it's true in the Second Circuit too, because they have, that's my former court. They have audio only arguments, about half of them, and they're much more structured. I don't think they're as good because there's no give and take, really.
Are the judges giving the petitioner, the respondent, a little extra time if they need it based on the fact that they're a little flustered with where are my papers? I'm a little bit confused. There's not a podium when we go to federal court. Usually, the microphone's right in front of you. You're sitting at the desk. Your papers are right there. Things are a little different. And I don't even want to get to the fact that I have a 10-year-old in the other room right now that I just told him to stay in there while we're recording. So there's a lot of distractions. Is there a little bit of counsel, we understand, take your time? Does that come out?
I think that's mostly true. But as you know, David, judges are all different, and most of them are more patient now because they know that it's hard to make sure it's an effective argument, but not everybody. And so that if your bandwidth isn't good and you freeze, that some of the courts will just terminate the argument. That's not great. So that's why all these points are so important.
Give us another one that you would think would be so important, one that you would say to a young lawyer, this is key. This is very, very important.
Let the judge finish his or her question before you answer it, especially if it's audio. You can't see the judge. You don't get those cues to tell you the judge has finished her question. On Zoom, it's a little easier, but I still think you should give a pause after you think the question's completed, because if you start interrupting the judge, then you lose your time, the judge gets mad, and things are not going well. So I would say make sure you wait to the judge finishes that question.
So like a little pause, just to make sure that
people say a beat, pause a beat,
pause a beat. Okay.
Yeah.
Dress wise, obviously we talked about this. Is it mandatory suit and tie? What do you think?
It's not mandatory, but what do you think? I mean, it's a solemn situation, and the judges expect you to dress like you're in court. If you come in and you don't have a tie on, it sends the wrong signal from right from the beginning, and you're representing somebody who suffers from that. So, you can't really overdress, I think, for these virtual arguments.
Just in your experience, by the way, in terms of the decision making, I know, unfortunately, in some of the state courts, they've been a little bit backlogged. There's a hiring freeze. A lot of the judges, there's a mandatory retirement at this point that they have to leave instead of being recertified. Is there a little bit of a backlog in terms of getting these arguments argued, decisions written?
I don't think in the appellate courts there is, but there's a big one in the trial courts, because trial courts are not having jury trials across the nation. And all these criminal cases are backing up, and they all have speedy trial issues. So once they start jury trials this spring, I think they will, that's all they're going to do. So if you have a motion to argue, a discovery dispute, even like a sentencing or a guilty plea, it's going to be harder to get court time starting like in mid-March. So I would get all that in now, because those courts aren't going to do anything else.
My last question really has to do with the future. In some respects, this works. Look, I'm doing this from my kitchen table. I don't know where you are, but I didn't have to go to the studio, sit in the chair, get mic'd up. This is kind of working. Do you see this as the future of what may be in terms of appellate argument in the federal court?
I think it's more of the future in trial court, because I think you're going to see status conferences, settlement conferences, motions arguments, if they're just on the law, virtually, because you don't need to be in court.
Yeah.
You need to be in court if you've got a defendant and it's a jury case or something like that. The appellate courts, I think they're going to go back to in-person arguments eventually, because they're better than they are even on Zoom. So I think that's the future.
Judge, great stuff. We really appreciate it. Members of the bar appreciate it. I get tons of questions after I have somebody like you on. So we really appreciate it. Hopefully you come back.
I'd love to.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more Today's Verdict right after this. All right, so welcome back. We are with one of my favorite people, Councilman Fernando Cabrera. Has been on the show many times before. Councilman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, because I get to be in your show.
There you go. That's what I love it. And we're talking about a topic here that, I think is so important. One of the reasons is I bike, and I know how dangerous it can be when you're not protected as a biker. And that doesn't just mean, wearing the right helmet and making sure that your bike is tuned up the correct way and have air in the tires. It's about bike lanes, right? So you're a biker, tell me a little bit about your thoughts in terms of biking throughout the city, biking throughout the Bronx.
First of all, again, thank you for having me. This is one of my favorite shows to come on, and just the vast amount of information that comes out of the show. They're so practical, so good. So look, I love bike riding. Loved it since I was a little kid. And, you know, I was raised a part of my life in Puerto Rico, and it was just very easy to go bike riding there. When finally I came back to New York, because I was born here in New York, and I started bike riding, I soon realized how potentially dangerous it can be. And yet at the same time, how much fun it could be, because there's so many things to see in New York City. And this is why I've been calling for more protected bike lanes. In light of the fact that now we're going to have e-scooters coming on, the e-scooter ride share are coming on also as well. And so those bike lanes, as you know, because you ride bikes, that they create a sense of protection, awareness, especially for the drivers to know and to respect each other's space. So we need them more than ever, and this is why we have to do better.
So the protected bike lanes are really protected by vehicles, usually, right? Because on the let's say you're riding on the right-hand side, on the left of the cars that are parked. So you have a barrier, and then you're riding up. There's a sidewalk on the side of you, but there's a sidewalk, so you're protected there. And to the left are the parked cars. So you really do feel a sense of security that no one can come in and kind of hit you from either side. You do have to watch out for cyclists coming the other way, but if it's a one-way bike lane, it's a home run. Am I correct?
Absolutely, 100%, and it just makes the experience a better experience. And then, you know, there are people who use those bike lanes to go to work, people who deliver food. And so this is why for the driver who is also concerned about those bike riders, it makes a huge difference. You know, one of the challenges that I have is here in the Bronx is that you're in a bike lane and all of a sudden the bike lane finishes and you're like,
Yeah.
You had that experience, right? Then like,
All the
where do I
time.
go? You know?
All the time, happens all the time. And, you know, when you go from park to park, well, that's great because you're in the park now, you know, and the bike lane, you know, kind of continues as you leave the park, but then all of a sudden the bike lane ends and you don't know. And okay, so maybe there is some kind of lane, but you're not protected. And anybody, trucks or anyone can get too close. And I'm sure, Fernando, you've had the experiences where cars have whizzed right by you and you say to yourself, wow, that was pretty close. That could have been me that's lying on the pavement there. And as opposed to a vehicle, when you're inside a car and you get injured, because I do the personal injury work, well, you're protected. You're protected by the shell of the car. And that's why motorcycles, when a motorcyclist gets so badly injured when they're involved in accidents, because there's no protection. Well, when you're on a bike, it's the same thing. You really have no protections whatsoever. Are you making any progress with respect to the bike lanes?
We are actually in my district alone. We're about to get 3 new bike lanes. And I know throughout the Bronx, they're about DOT informed us that they're about to create more lanes right here in the Bronx, which is what we need. But we need to do more. I think DOT needs to sit down with the community boards, with elected officials, the advocates, like Transportation Alternative, and look at how to connect all these lanes together. And at the same time, I know there's concern for parking.
Well, let's talk. Yeah, I was going to say that. Let's talk parking spots, because there are people who circle their blocks for almost an hour sometimes trying to get an alternate side of the street or something. You know, parking spots are in high demand. A lot of people in the Bronx can't afford an indoor parking lot. What do you do?
Well, 50% of people who live in the Bronx do not own a car. And so we have to make lanes for those who use their bikes, or obviously now we also have mass transit, but we also have the e-scooters coming on. And what we learn is that when e-scooters come on and e-bikes, that in some cities, we see less use of cars by 20%. We see a reduction of the use of cars and vehicles by 20%. And so I think that we're going to see a reduction of people using their vehicles, not that we have alternatives modes of transportation. But this is why that coordination needs to take place.
All right, let's give you a little bit of a shout out here. You're running for borough president. A lot of people are excited. I'm sure you're very excited. Tell me how it's going. I mean,
we're doing great.
campaign?
Most people are saying, Cabrera, you're the front runner. We have a tremendous amount of support. There's, we're getting support from all over the Bronx, and we want to unite the Bronx. We're going through difficult times. My mom died of COVID-19 last year. 6 weeks later, my mother-in-law, and I understand the pain, but I also understand that we got to turn that pain into purpose, and I believe that we could do better. My district went through some of the things that we're experiencing right now. We had a 23.5 unemployment, crime, and kids were not getting educated. I got in, and now we brought unemployment down to 5.7, 66% reduction in crime, and our kids are 99% graduation rates from high schools. That's what I want to bring to the borough. So I'm really, really excited about it.
Well, I think a lot of people are excited to have you. Some final thoughts as we're hopefully, moving into the vaccination phase? I'm hoping people in the Bronx will get vaccinated. I know there's always fear of, sometimes distrust of the medical community. I understand that. My clients have that in the Bronx. I get it. Sometimes they're not treated so well in some of the hospitals. It's happened. But, what is your thoughts in terms of the vaccinations and getting us there?
I will encourage people to get it. As soon as I could get it, I'm going to go and get it. Why? Number one, I know there's concerns and fear, but I will tell you this. Pfizer and Moderna and those companies will not put a product out that will hurt people and then get sued. You know that as a lawyer. Number two, we need them. We have thousands of New Yorkers that are literally dying, hundreds by the week. And so we gotta get on top of that. And third, this is a protein molecule. You're not getting COVID or even a dead COVID. It's new technology and it's very safe.
Well, again, we're on the same page. Councilman, I want to thank you very much for coming on as usual. Stay safe, and I guess we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have a question or an issue you'd like me to discuss on a future show, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until the next time, always remember, know the issues, know the verdict. See you next time.